He says I am all. He says I am all. He says I am, and he says I am his own.
Well, good morning, Northview. How are you doing this morning? It is so good to see you. I want to say a special hello to all of you who are joining us online. We're so grateful you could connect with us today. If you have a Bible on you or a Bible app on your phone, turn it to the book of Ruth. We're going to continue in this series that we're in right now called Fierce. Today we took a 1-week break last week for groundbreaking. What a special day that was. So grateful for that and for all that everybody that was able to participate in that and be a part of that special day. Thank you for being here. We can't wait to see what God's going to do. You've already are beginning to see out in the parking lot the beginning work happening. There's been some stuff tore up, some holes dug, some holes filled. The east entrance is blocked off right now while they're doing some work to begin to bring water over to the new building. So exciting stuff. From time to time, we'll have to send out some notes to you guys via social or via email, just to be aware on any given weekend of exits or entrances that may be closed, or which way you need to park or how you need to come in the lot, those kind of things. So be looking for those in the weeks that are ahead. But today we're going to dive into Ruth. This is a great little story. It's an often overlooked, often missed story that's in the Old Testament. It's the 8th book of the Bible. It's kind of in the era, it takes place in the era of the Judges. But it's not really about Judges, and it's not even really, it doesn't appear to be much about the nation of Israel on the surface. And so you start to get into this, and it starts to sneak up on you a little bit, because at first glance, it feels like just a normal, but maybe random family that's going through some hardships and some difficulties. They're in a tough spot. You open up the book, and you read about this woman named Naomi. She has a husband named Elimelech. And famine hits the land. Famine hits Israel, and they have got to do something to try to live, just to try to make it. And so they're forced to move. I remember when I was in 8th grade, going into my 8th grade year, my dad, his job got transferred. And so he no longer had a job in the town that I grew up in. He was going to have to find another job within the company somewhere else. And oh, by the way, the company's headquarters are 2 hours away from here in the St. Louis area. And so that's where we had to move. And for me at 8th grade, going in just about to high school, it felt like a death sentence. It was the worst idea, worst timing, just terrible to have to move in that. But what can you do, right? It's like, this is Dad's livelihood. This is how we're going to make it or not make it. So we have to move. In this story, Elimelech, Naomi, they got nothing. There's famine. They got to go where there's food. They got to try to live. They've got to try to make it. And so they move from the promised land to Moab, which is like, it's enemy territory. I mean, it's a hostile relationship. It's a hostile place. There are not friendly relationships between Moab and Israel. Lots of battle, lots of fighting. It's just ugly, but desperate times call for desperate measures. They move Elimelech and Naomi to Moab, and they have 2 boys, and in time, they're there a decade. In time, the boys both marry 2 women who are Moabites. And then tragedy just starts to hit the family. Over the course of those 10 years, Naomi loses her husband, Elimelech. He dies. And then both of her sons die. And so it's Naomi and 2 daughters-in-law who are native Moabites, Orpah and Ruth. That's kind of how this story starts. Just terrible tragedy, difficult circumstances. Naomi is so hurt by what has happened that she says to her daughters-in-law, "Don't call me Naomi anymore." Naomi means pleasant. She says, "Don't even call me pleasant, because that's not my name. That is not who I am. That is not what I'm feeling." She says, "When you talk to me, call me bitter. That's my new name, bitter." Because her world just blew up. She lost her husband, she lost both her sons, and now she's in a foreign land with nothing, has no status, no money, no nothing. She's devastated. She's looking up at the heavens, wondering what in the world just happened, and wondering, where are you, God, in all of this? It's one of the reasons why I love this little book. I think it does a phenomenal job at answering the question, where is God when life falls apart? When everything blows up, when tragedy strikes, when difficulties come into your life, when the script doesn't go where you wanted it to go or where you thought where it was going to go, how do you make sense of everything that's happened? Where is God when life falls apart? And it even feels like he's against you. It's a real question. It's a real emotion. It's one that Naomi felt. It's one that she tried to sort through but really was lost for a period of time trying to find it. But you know, Ruth could be this incredible story of grief and loss and hardship. But by the time we get to the end of the story, boy, it's something totally different. And I think it answers this question very well of how does God pick up the pieces and where is he in these moments when such difficult circumstances come our way. Naomi determines, I'm going to go back home. That's kind of her first step in this story, is the hardship hits, and she says, I'm going back home. And so she tells her daughters-in-law, you all stay here. This is your home. This is your home territory. You go back to your parents. You go back to your families. I'm going to go back to where I came from. Well, she came from Bethlehem, that same little town that Jesus was born in. But this is like 1,000 years before Jesus was born. But she tells them, listen, I'm going back. You guys stay here, start over, and begin to find a new life. I'm bitter. I'm going home. Orpah, one of the daughters-in-law, says, sounds like a plan. And so she leaves. But the other daughter-in-law is Ruth. And what she says in response to Naomi is breathtaking. And it sets the stage for the kind of bold loyalty and faith that Ruth will demonstrate through the entire book. When Naomi says, I'm bitter, I'm going home, don't come with me, you stay here and start over, Naomi says, don't urge me to leave you or turn back from you. Where you go, I will go. Where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people. Your God will be my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I'll be buried. May the Lord deal with me, be it ever so severely, if even death separates you and me. You may have heard that verse before, and my guess is, if you've heard it before, you heard it read at a wedding. It's a verse that finds its way into wedding ceremonies often, but interestingly enough, the original context is not between a bride and a groom, but between a mother-in-law and a daughter-in-law. And Ruth has been taken in to some degree by Naomi. She's learned about the God of Israel, and she is convinced he is the one true God. And there's something in this exchange, there's something in her faith, there's something in her relationship with Naomi that says, I don't care if you're pushing me away, I'm not leaving you. I'm going to walk this with you. Where you go, I will go. And this unlikely friendship begins to go into a whole nother place between Naomi and Ruth. You know, people, we often ask, where is God when life falls apart? I think through this relationship with Ruth and Naomi, one of the answers that we see in this story is he's often closer than you think or feel. God was using Ruth and her commitment and love to Naomi to be a physical expression of his presence to Naomi in the midst of this most difficult time. But Naomi looks right past it initially. She's just blinded. She's blinded by her bitterness. She's blinded by the hardship. She's blinded by the difficulties that she's experiencing. She's blinded by God's grace, this grace being her daughter-in-law Ruth. Why? Well, the same reason often we are blinded by God's grace. We look past it because we script a different story than the one God writes. And often we think we know and want, and we become resentful when the story doesn't go the direction that we want it to go. And in doing so, we often miss some of the great gifts and blessings that God has right in front of us. Maybe you're in a spot right now where you're frustrated with the way your story is going. You have a plan. You had an agenda. You have a desire for where you wanted it to go. It's not going that way. And so you're bitter. You're upset. Maybe it's because great pain. I don't mean like you have an agenda and you shouldn't have agendas. It's great to have a plan. It's great to have a vision. It's great to have a direction in life. Some of your agenda got interrupted by hardship that you never asked for. Naomi didn't ask for her husband to die and for her two sons to die. So it's not crazy to say, God, I didn't want this to happen. Nobody would want this to happen. But she's so blinded in her pain that even when God is drawing near, it takes for a while to be able to even recognize it. Her daughter-in-law shows this unbelievable loyalty in this moment and says, I don't care if you're hurt, bitter, and trying to push me away. I'm not going anywhere. There is incredible nobility for caring for people in their time of need. And it's one of the ways that God uses relationships with people to be a physical expression of his presence with them in life. We have a core value here at the church. Core value number 2, walking together. And that value is basically about linking up life to life with people, specifically through spiritual growth moments, through hardship moments. Sometimes what we need in life is a friend who says, you're out of faith? I get it. I've been there. Let me loan you some of mine for a little bit. You can borrow some. You ever had a good friend that you felt like you were borrowing some faith from? Like you were out of it, but they had some, and you were borrowing off them for a while? That's all part of the design of God for relationships, to be able to influence each other in that kind of way, where we grow together, where we walk together. They walked through this hardship. I saw it this Monday night. Just at the other end of the building, we launched a brand new ministry called Regen. And we're trying to help people find new life in Christ. No matter what hardships they've experienced, no matter what battles they're facing, anxieties, addictions, anger issues, whatever it may be, hurts. Let's try to move to a new place and a new experience with it. We launched this thing after a lot of prayer, a lot of conversation, a lot of planning. And opening night, 45 people showed up. 45 people. It was electric. It was an incredible night. But one of the conversations that I had as I was talking with people as they were coming in, that just hung with me was one of the two people came in and they said, we're here. She called me and said, I think this is something that you could really grow from. This would really help you. I'm a friend. We both know you're going through this really hard thing. But she called, this friend did, to say, I just wanted you to know that if you would go, I'll go with you. I'll go with you. And so here they are together on Monday night, taking steps. One who really, really needs to find some hope and healing. And one who simply said, because I love you, I'll give up my time and walk this journey with you. That's what Ruth did for Naomi. She said, we'll walk this together, even though you're trying to push me away. Sometimes one of the greatest graces that God gives us is a caring brother and sister who will walk through the fire with us. So Ruth and Naomi link up arms, and they leave Moab, and they head back to Bethlehem. They get to Naomi's hometown of Bethlehem. And of course, news starts to, it's a small town, okay? Naomi's been gone for a decade. So people notice when she comes home. And oh, by the way, when she comes home, Elimelech, her husband, is gone, as well as her two sons. I mean, everybody would know the story. They would feel bad for her. They would understand the hardship that she's facing. But not only are they going through hardship, now she's back, but she has no status. No husband, no boys. At that time, this was a huge deal. So they were going to have to scavenge. She was going to have to scavenge just to make a living, just to try to get by. So Ruth says, essentially, to her mother-in-law, let me take care of this. I will make sure that you're taken care of and that you're there. Remember, she's a Moabite. Remember, Moabites and Israelites did not get along. There was racial tension of the most brutal form. But Ruth says, I will take care of you. At my risk, I will make sure. And so she goes out to a field where people are harvesting. The Israelites had some laws that allowed for people who were in desperate situations to kind of grab scraps from the edges of fields and be able to be fed. As you were harvesting, there were things that would fall out of the wagons, or they would just kind of be the left behinds. And there were laws that allowed people to come and scoop some of this stuff up, and it was part of how God was providing for the poorest of the poor. Ruth takes us to another level and says, I'm not going to wait for the scraps around the edges. I'm going to go, and this is where this boldness piece with her, this is why she's in this series. She goes, I'm going to go request that I stand behind the harvesters, not waiting for them to do all their work and clean it all up, but as soon as it drops and falls, I'm going to scoop it up and put it in my bag. I'm going to ask for that kind of relationship. It's bold as a woman. It's even bolder as a foreigner with these tensions that exist, and yet she's granted permission to do so. Well, then the owner of the field comes into the picture, and he sees something that's a little out of ordinary. Who is this foreign woman out in the field who's gathering up right behind my harvesters? This is in Ruth chapter 2, verse 4. His name is Boaz, and it says, just then Boaz arrived from Bethlehem, greeted the harvesters. The Lord be with you, the Lord bless you, they answered. Then Boaz asked the overseer of his harvesters, who does that young woman belong to? And the overseer said, she's the Moabite who came back from Moab with Naomi. She said, please let me glean and gather among the sheaves behind the harvesters. She came into the field, and she's remained here from morning till now, except for a short rest in the shelter. So Boaz said to Ruth, my daughter, listen to me. Don't go and glean in any other field, and don't go away from here. Stay here with the women who work for me. Watch the field where the men are harvesting and following along after the women. I've told the men not to lay a hand on you. And whenever you're thirsty, go and get a drink from the water jars the men have filled. At this, she bowed down her face to the ground, and she asked him, why have I found favor in your eyes that you notice me, a foreigner? And Boaz replied, I've been told about all that you've done for your mother-in-law since the death of your husband, how you left your father and mother and your homeland. You came to live with people you did not know before. May the Lord repay you for what you've done. May you be richly rewarded by the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge. She steps back in this moment and basically says, why are you going to show me favor? Why? I thought this was going to be harder. I thought this was going to be more difficult. I thought it was going to be more dangerous. And Boaz basically says, I'm going to make sure that you get everything you need, and that not only you, but also your mother-in-law, Naomi, are taken care of. Don't go harvest any other fields. You stay right here in mine, and we'll take care of you, and we'll make sure you get every single thing that you need. And she says, who am I? And why have I found favor that you would deal with me in such a way? This is another answer to the question, where is God when life falls apart? He's often closer than you think or feel, but he's also always working in ways you cannot see. He's gone before her, and he's already set up a moment that she could have never, ever thought was coming. He sets this moment up with Boaz. Who is Boaz? This is important, and this is why God was already ahead of this. Boaz is the son of Rahab. If you know your Old Testament history, when the Israelites were entering the promised land, one of the first things they had to do was cross the Jordan River, and then they had to take down Jericho, right? And they marched around the city, and the walls fell and all that. Well, before they did that big siege, they sent spies to check it out. And rumors that spies were checking things out began to circulate through Jericho. And so when it was rumored that there were spies inside the city walls, they shut the gates. And they began a search for these spies that had been sent by Joshua. Well, the spies hid. And they ended up being given shelter by a prostitute named Rahab. And she says to them, the whole city is quaking in fear because of your God. And in more words than I'll share here, she basically says, I want in with him and out of here. Didn't matter what her story was. Didn't matter what her past was. It didn't matter how many mistakes she had made. It didn't matter her profession to these two spies. They said, because you have saved us, we will save you. And when we come in to lay siege to this city, here's how you'll mark it so we know to make sure we get you out of here. And so then she hides the spies and allows all the interrogators and the investigators to come in, and she doesn't reveal their position even though they're on the roof above her house. The city's all closed up. There's no way out. How are these two spies going to get out of this city safely? Well, her house was built into the wall of the city. And so under the cover of night, she opens a window and lets these guys out. And they go back to camp and eventually come back and are part of this siege. The point is this, is that there are many situations in life that close in on you like gates being shut. And it looks like certain doom is in front of you. And it looks like there's no way out. But God has this special ability of doing this. Whenever gates close, he often finds windows to open. And in the midst of great chaos, in the midst of great confusion, all of a sudden, a blessing, a window opens, and a way out begins to be seen. Boaz is the son of Rahab. Rahab is saved by the spies, engrafted into the nation of Israel, a people whom she didn't belong to, with a character morally that she didn't have any standing to say anything good for, but she is grafted into the family of Israel. So what I'm saying is Boaz was raised in a redeemed family. He knows what it's like. He lived it. His family legacy is, we don't belong here, but by the grace of God, we're here. I shouldn't be experiencing blessing, but by the grace of God, I am. So of all the people to see Ruth out in the field, here's a guy whose life has been touched and redeemed by God, and he says, this is my moment. This is my moment to do for her what was done for my family. See, God, he was setting all this up. He was setting all this up in ways that Ruth and Naomi could have never, ever predicted. He learned of her situation, and he moved favorably to her. This was risky for Ruth to be there, but she still did it. She still did it. Boaz recognized her. God is at work in ways that she couldn't see. But the story continues to have moments of faith. She finds this initial favor with Boaz. And when she comes back to the house, Naomi says, because she comes in with like 2 weeks worth of food. And here Naomi thought she was going to go scrap for enough food to eat for a day or two. And because of this favor that she found with Boaz, she comes home with tons from the field. My goodness, what happened when you were out in the field? Why do you come home with such? She says, I met a man named Boaz who was out in the field. And he saw fit to treat me with favor. And she says, I know that name. That's a family name. That's a family name. She says, he's a kinsman redeemer of ours. Now, we don't have something like this in our culture. But in the Jewish culture, there was this thing called a kinsman redeemer, where if you had a brother who died and you were unmarried, there was an expectation that you would marry his widow and raise his kids. It was a way of continuing family lines. And they would just go on down the list. If the next oldest brother was married, they'd go to the next one. And if he was married, and eventually, and if it was all the brothers were married, they could go outside of the immediate family to others who were connected. It was a way of establishing and caring for widows. It was a way for continuing family lines. And Naomi says, I know this name. He's a redeemer of ours. And so she says, Ruth, here's what you need to do. And she basically says, you throw yourself at him. You throw yourself at him. Now, have you ever put yourself out there to someone you're chasing and you're romantic? Like there's a moment of courage, right, involved in that whole thing. And Naomi says, this is what you need to do. And so she does. She goes to Boaz in the evening after a banquet of sorts have had. Boaz is in good spirits, if you know what I mean. He's on the threshing floor. They often guys would sometimes sleep in that area because that's where all their money was. They had all this harvest, and they were afraid someone would steal it. And so guys would sometimes take turns guarding it at night and making sure no one stole it. So that's where he's at. He's probably had too much to drink that night. It says in verse 7, when Boaz had finished eating and drinking, was in good spirits, he went over to lie down at the far end of the grain pile. Ruth approached quietly, uncovered his feet, and lay down. In the middle of the night, something startled the man. He turned, and there was a woman lying at his feet. "Who are you?" he asked. "I'm your servant Ruth," she said. "Spread out the corner of your garment over me, since you are a guardian redeemer of our family." That's a very Jewish and Far East ancient way of saying, "Marry me, dude." He says in verse 10, "The Lord bless you, my daughter. This kindness is greater than that which you showed earlier. You've not run after the younger men, whether rich or poor. And now, my daughter, don't be afraid. I'll do all that you ask. All the people of my town know that you are a woman of noble character. And although it's true that I'm guardian redeemer of our family, there's another more closely related than I. Stay here for the night, but in the morning, if he wants to do his duty as your guardian redeemer, good, let him redeem you. But if he's not willing, as surely as the Lord lives, I'll do it. So lie here until morning." You know, as I said earlier, one of the things I love about this story is its unsuspecting nature. You know, there's so many Old Testament stories. God speaks audibly to Abraham. Moses gets the burning bush. Noah gets the ark. Jonah the big fish. Samson with his big, mighty comic book superhero strength. This is just ordinary people. This is just an ordinary family going through a whole lot of pain and a whole lot of difficulty. And at first glance, there's not any overt, obvious, miraculous action of God. But by the time you get to the end of the story, you see that it's all about God, and it's all about his power in their life. It was God who broke the famine and opened the way back home. It was God who preserved Boaz, the Kinsmen Redeemer, to continue Naomi's line. It was God who convicts Ruth to stay with Naomi. It was God who led Ruth to Boaz. God is constantly at work. He's constantly at work, even though our eyes can usually never see it. When life is spiraling, when life is difficult, when hardship is in your face, and you're tempted to say, "God, you're gone. I'm bitter you're not here." One of the things this story reminds us is God is always at work. He's always at work. He's always doing something. One author said it this way: God is most powerfully present when he seems most conspicuously absent. So just when you think he's gone and he's not here and he's not helping and he's not doing things, get ready, because here's what he's up to. Here's what he's up to. Where is he? Well, he's busy writing a redemption story that you couldn't script. He's got some chapters in this story that go beyond our imagination, that go beyond what Ruth could have imagined or Naomi could have imagined. There's a little bit of drama left in the story. We read that there's actually technically another kinsman redeemer who is next in line in front of Boaz. I find this to be a great spiritual principle. This is just a side note. Even when God speaks clearly and starts moving things aside, obviously, you still have moments of faith and anxiety required. Like anxiety. So now she had to be kind of oh no, what if this other guy wants to redeem me? I don't want to go with him. I want to go with Boaz, right? You're still going to have to trust. You're still going to have to wait. But he forfeits his right, so Boaz promptly redeems Ruth, and in doing so, redeems all of Elimelech's property that would have been lost. Verse 16 of chapter 4, it says, "So Boaz took Ruth, and she became his wife. And when he made love to her, the Lord enabled her to conceive. She gave birth to a son. And the women said to Naomi, 'Praise be to the Lord, who this day has not left you without a guardian redeemer.' May he be famous throughout Israel. He'll renew your life and sustain you in your old age. For your daughter-in-law who loves you is better to you than 7 sons has given birth. And Naomi took the child in her arms and cared for him. And the women living there said, Naomi has a son. And they named him Obed. And he was the father of Jesse. And Jesse was the father of David. 2 things here about God writing a redemptive script that is just mind-blowing. Number one, did you catch this? Where when the baby was born, as part of the praise to God for the baby, there's also this little thing where the women say about Ruth, Naomi, the daughter-in-law that God gave you is better than 7 sons. Now, 7 is biblically like this number of completion. It's this number of perfection. In that day, sons were about the highest status you could have. I mean, when it came to riches, when it came to status, when it came to influence, sons were the ticket, right? And if you had more sons, you had more status, you had more security. And they say to her, your daughter-in-law is more valuable than 7 sons. Let me try to break that apart and say it in a different way. What they're saying, and this is hard to say and hear, but it's so true. They're saying, Naomi, your daughter-in-law has given you something that you could have never had with just your boys. There is a part of this story that is better. That is better because this stuff has happened. That is so crazy to say out loud. And when you're in hardship and you look out at the things that you go through, and then you start to see this redemptive story that gets written, you will find yourself in these places where God's redemption starts to become so complete. You never get over hardship, specifically death, like she had here. But what she could unmistakably say is, even in the face of all that pain, God has written a story that's better than my wildest imaginations. His grace has been poured out on my life. And while I have lost my 2 sons, I've been given in this woman, in my daughter-in-law, the effect of 7 boys. She has meant that much to me. She has changed me that much. That's the first part that's just incredible. The second part is that genealogy at the end. Did you catch that? So Ruth has a baby, and they name the baby Obed. Well, then Obed is the father of Jesse, and Jesse is the father of, King David. King David, who would be the one who was promised that the Messiah is going to come through his line. This same genealogy picks up in Matthew chapter 1, where this one left off with David. In Matthew 1, it keeps going. And it goes from David all the way to Jesus. And in that genealogy, guess who is listed as one of the standout people of faith? In a genealogy and in an era where it was predominantly male-oriented, only the men were listed in the genealogy. Who's in it in Matthew 1? Ruth. Ruth, the Moabite, the outsider. The one who said, I will go with you wherever you go, Naomi. Your God will be my God. Your people will be my people. I will not leave you. I will not allow anything but death to separate us. There's this incredible part of this Matthew chapter 1 genealogy where it's like he's going to tell us about Jesus, but he wanted us to see this like, look, before I tell you about him, you got to know about his family. Because when you see his family and you see where he came from, you're going to understand the kind of things that they were about, he was about. You're going to see the faith that they had that he shows. You're going to see the characteristics that on an even greater level, Jesus will display. That's what this becomes about. There's this bigger and better version of Ruth that's represented in Jesus, but it's so similar. Just like Ruth said, I see Naomi about to lose her life, and if I don't give mine up, she's going to die. But because I love her, I'm going to do it. She understands that for me to take care of my mother-in-law, I've got to go to her place. I got to become an outsider. I got to go somewhere where where I don't belong, where I don't have people that care about me, where I don't have people. In fact, I'm going to get ridiculed. I'm going to be abused. I'm going to have to take on poverty so that I can provide for her the riches that will sustain it. Is this reminding you of anybody? This is exactly what Jesus did. He said, for me to save their life, I've got to give up mine. For me to give them riches of heaven, I've got to leave this splendor and enter into their poverty. I've got to extend to them and cling to the cross like Ruth was clinging to Naomi at the loss of his life. Jesus clings to that cross at the loss of his. And he does it because of his fierce and loyal love for you and me. So we today are just left in the fallout of this incredible love. And we're prompted to make some decisions based on all that God is and all that he's doing. And I want to put a few in front of you. Maybe for you, a first-time decision to follow Jesus Christ is your decision. And this is the moment to do it. Today is the day. As we sing these next songs, if you want to make that decision, meet me over to your right by the baptistry. Maybe for you, this is reaffirming, I need to walk together with some people through some hard times that I'm going through. I'm trying to understand the past. I'm trying to work through the present. I need to be at Regen next Monday night in the Student Center, tomorrow night at 6:30. I'm going because I want to find where this story goes. For all of us, that's where the last piece of this is. Trusting God that those last chapters are going to be so good. They're going to be so good that no matter how hard some of the first or the middle ones are, that in the end, God's grace will cover it all in a way that leads us only to thank him for his goodness to us. If you're not there and you're struggling to get there, allow this moment of worship to be part of what propels you and takes you to that place. Will you stand with me? And will you pray with me? Heavenly Father, we love and thank you. And God, we understand you in such small ways. We try to put our head and our hearts around all that you are, but it's just, we struggle every time we try. But God, through stories like Ruth's, we see you reflected. And so, Father, I just pray that we would take that to heart, that we would see who you are in her story, that we would respond accordingly. We love you. We praise you. It's in your name that we pray.